Peggy is the 21st Commissioner of the FDA. She was appointed in 2009. She has a background that is ideally suited for her position in that she is a physician. She had her medical degree from Harvard and then trained at PNS, so she's a real doctor. She did research, laboratory research at the NIH, so she knows what that's all about. Administration there as well. Did some brilliant work in New York City as Commissioner of Health. And then when she was appointed as Commissioner of the FDA, we had a chance to talk very early on, and Peggy realized the importance of the FDA as being an enabler of appropriate drugs, devices that improve human health. It clearly has a regulatory oversight, but it's enabler of progress, and instituted the concept of regulatory science. Under your leadership, I do believe there has been a change in the perception of the FDA as a partner to do the right thing for the health of the public. And you have done an awful lot for personalized medicine. The Personalized Medicine Coalition came out with a publication, I don't know if it was timed specifically to this event, indicating that over 20% of the very large number of new drugs last year were related to personalized medicine. 20%, that's really a wonderful thing. So let me start by asking you a general question, and then we'll get into the specifics. At this meeting, there was a tremendous outflow of information and excitement about a field that has the potential and is already transforming our approach to healthcare. From one size fits all, looking backwards, disease looking backwards, to trying to predict, deal with personalized care, the right therapy for the right individual. We talked about progress in next generation sequencing, massive sequencing of many, many people, the accumulation of data from different areas, clinical data, the development of new predictive tools, multivariant diagnostics, and on and on and on. Things that we didn't discuss, wearable medical devices, software directly to the consumer, an incredibly dynamic field. Historically, not necessarily under your watch, the FDA has not been known for being the most fleet of foot, being able to keep up with advances. Given the importance of healthcare to the entire economy, just generally speaking, how do you view this dynamic change in approaches to care and the role of the FDA, appropriate oversight, yet continuing to act as an enabler?
Well, that's a really big question, but a really important topic. And I think, that FDA has to be a full partner in the work of the scientific community and in the efforts to advance biomedical product innovation. I think we feel very, very strongly, whatever roles we have within the FDA, that we are there because we want to see opportunities in science translate into real-world care for patients. We want to be able to be a gateway, not a barrier to innovation, but we want the innovation to be truly meaningful for patients and consumers. And just because something is new doesn't actually mean that it provides that benefit. And so that's sort of our role, is to really make sure that the products are demonstrated to be safe and effective and of high quality and do what they're supposed to do. But we see our role as really so much more than the way we're frequently sort of caricatured as bureaucrats with our clipboards and our checklists going through an application once it crosses the transom at FDA. We think that especially in this dynamic world of enormous breakthroughs in science and technology, that we can best be a partner and fulfill our mission, which is a very important, unique one as a science-based regulatory agency with a public health mission to promote and protect health. We think we can actually do our most effective job if we are part of the discussions about the science as well as fulfilling our unique role as a regulatory agency.
So getting into the specifics of some of the areas that were subject to most of the conversation here and a lot of the breakthroughs. The initial discussions or concepts of personalized medicine really did start being articulated at the turn of this century, related to the entire sequencing of the human genome. And as all of us know, progress in the ability to sequence has exceeded even Moore's law. I mean, totally unexpected how quickly it's gone. And what we learned was the number of initiatives to do massive sequencing of multiple genomes, and the issue of how you see regulation of next generation sequencing. I'd be interested in your thoughts of what are the challenges, what are the things that you are concerned about, the issues from the FDA that you are most concerned about in terms of the technology itself. And then if we talk about the technology initially in terms of the analytic validations, and then after that we'll ask you a question about clinical validation.
Okay. Well, could I step back and first respond to, you mentioned, that we've sort of really had a fairly short period of time since the dramatic advances in sequencing the genome and really, changing the science and technological basis for precision or personalized medicine. And I want to underscore that, I've often asked, how come it's not happening faster? But a lot has happened when you
Yes.
look. And, we were looking back at some of our data, and in the period in the early 1990s, there were 5% or less of drugs were targeted therapies. Now your report said 20%. I know in 2013 it was actually closer to 45%, and there's year-to-year variability. But there's a lot in terms of the new drugs that are being approved and the new opportunities in medical care. Targeted therapy is very real, and we see a lot of prospect for even more advance over the horizon. But also the use of genetic information and other biomarker information in our labels and in the indications for use, et cetera. I mean, it's very much integrated into the practice of medicine in ways that I think are not fully appreciated, but we need to do much more. But I guess I shouldn't say integrated into the practice of medicine necessarily. Our part is products and talking about indications for use, and that is, it's very much a part of what we're seeing in terms of the products that are coming before us and how we're thinking about our work. But it's getting more and more complicated, and you raised the issue of next generation sequencing, and clearly we need to be rethinking our approach, and the old paradigm, really doesn't apply. It's one thing to have one diagnostic for one disease in the old world, but in the modern era, that just cannot be the framework that we use. And so we're very much immersed in thinking about how to optimize FDA regulatory oversight of next generation sequencing. And some of you may have seen a concept paper that was published recently in the Federal Register, but probably available through other sources as well, that sort of laid out a set of questions and issues and proposed strategies to deal with the fact that with whole genome sequencing, the number of genetic variants are just enormous, literally numbering in the millions. and that we cannot possibly be thinking about having clinical validation of every possible association with those variants, but we have to have a science-based approach that enables us to provide physicians and patients with information that they can really act on. We've got the two challenges, as you noted, analytic validity and clinical validity, and both are made more complicated in the world of whole genome sequencing, but the opportunities to apply that kind of approach to diagnostics is enormous. So our goal is really to have a very robust discussion about different approaches, and we're asking people to engage with us. There's going to be a public meeting February 20th, I believe, a workshop, and we're taking comment. We've opened up a docket on our concept paper, so I ask all of you to take a look and give us feedback. But we have approved a product for next generation sequencing, and we did it by relying on scientific evidence,
right,
curated databases that enabled us to think and act differently, but appropriately for the realities of where science and technology is today. And we want to continue to expand that approach, and really feel it's got to be a dynamic process. We've got to work closely with the scientific community. We have to rely on the best and the brightest minds in science today, and we have to think about opportunities within the U.S., but this is a global
Sure.
issue as well in terms of the science that we need as the basis of our work.
So as you already indicated, we are moving away from classifying disease by its phenotype to understanding the fine-tuning mechanistic differences between diseases. What this has done, certainly in the area of cancer, to some degree, it's simplified the drivers that are causing cancer, independent of the tissue or independent of the phenotype. But on the other hand, we're finding the multiple differences even within an individual. And the concept of thinking of populations as large groups, getting down to an N of 1, as some people have talked about. What are your thoughts about how this will deal with the nature of clinical trials, and also potentially to the nature of labeling? I'm sure you've given this a lot of thought.
Well, clearly we're in a period of some dynamic innovation in terms of clinical trial design and approaches, and you can see that in the approvals that we are making, and our approach to the scientific databases for our regulatory review. For example, last month we approved a drug for the treatment of advanced ovarian cancer, yes, in women that have a defective BRCA gene, and that was a single-arm trial, and I think it was 137 patients, and some 38% or so of the patients in the study showed diminution of tumor size, and that was the basis for the approval. That's, I think, appropriate approach, but very different than some of the ways in which we used to ask for studies to be done and the kinds of data on which we would make an approval. It was an accelerated approval, yeah, and we're going to continue to look at data.
One of the consequences of collecting large amounts of data clearly is interpreting what it really means, which is a lot more difficult than I think many people realize. But one of the potential advantages of being able to collect data continuously on individuals over time might be creating new opportunities for post-marketing surveillance, or maybe other opportunities that you have been thinking about that we may not have. But how are you viewing the ability to collect data on products that are marketed in impacting the review and the approval process?
Well, we do have some very big efforts underway that some of you may be familiar with in terms of post-market surveillance and really, continuing to collect data in the post-market setting, particularly with respect to safety, but, we can learn more about efficacy and appropriate use as well. There's more focus now on how can we use existing data sets and so-called big data to better understand issues in the pre-market context. For example, I think there are huge opportunities. We know that a lot of cancer drugs, for example, are used off-label for treatment. Sometimes those uses are never brought to the FDA in terms of an application for a changed indication because the companies are not really in a position to pursue doing the studies and collecting the information, doing the formal applications. But there's a huge benefit in really, in a more rigorous way, assessing are those off-label uses truly benefiting patients. And because there's a lot of information out there, we ought to tap into it and see if there are ways that we can study that use in real-world practice. And as we think about all of the opportunities now with electronic health records and much deeper potential for data collection about patients, from genomic information to, of course, their medical care and disease conditions, we need to work together as a scientific community to really look at how can we ask and answer some really important questions to deepen our understanding about disease conditions, symptomatology, relationship of disease progression and response to treatment that reflects information about genetics and environmental exposures, treatments, and other factors that make a difference.
I'd like to get your view about the issue of the patient as opposed to the provider being the competent intermediary. The way medicine has been practiced, including up until now, but it's changing, is that the physician very often makes the decision and the patient may or may not take the advice of the physician. Usually not, although the physician thinks that they are. But now, so many devices or information is going directly to the consumer, directly to the patient. Do you have any generally thoughts about how you see that and how that might be impacting or impacted or appropriate ways that ought to be regulated, that information that the consumer gets, whether it be clinical information or wearable devices, how should that be regulated? And is this something that you consider to be new or pretty much an extension of things you've done before?
Well, I think there's no doubt that there has been an evolution in terms of an empowered and engaged consumer population, and people wanting to know more, to be able to make more informed choices, and of course there's more access to information than there's ever been before with the internet, and there's also been, I think, a very pronounced movement to trying to help support the consumer interest in terms of new approaches, whether it's wearable devices or direct-to-consumer testing and other approaches. And we're very supportive. Our goal, though, is to make sure that whatever the issue and whomever is the recipient of certain kinds of information, that information be accurate and reliable. And so, I think it's an area that is continuing to develop and evolve. Some of it is developing and evolving in areas where FDA historically didn't have a big presence.
Right.
None of us really thought about mobile medical apps when we trained in medicine, and the FDA, certainly wasn't at the forefront of thinking about what all the possibilities might be, but it's very much the world we live in now, and, we've been trying to think about a regulatory approach that can help support important innovation, can help support the interests and desires of consumers to get access to this information, and a recognition that there's huge benefits to patients to be able to have information and act on that information in a way that can promote health and health-related behaviors, and also to inform medical decision-making in concert with their physicians. So, we're trying to, again, work with the various stakeholders in these efforts to try to anticipate what's coming down the pike and to be able to understand the realities of the products that come before us. It underscores a point that you touched on earlier, which is that it's very important that FDA be as equipped as possible, within our walls, to be able to provide regulatory oversight and support for increasingly complex medical products. But it's also very, very important that we partner with all of the stakeholders and really go where the knowledge and the science is as we think about our approaches, so that we can be an enabler rather than an inhibitor of progress.
Okay, that's a segue to a question that probably most of the people in the audience are really interested in hearing what you have to say, and that's laboratory-developed tests. You've come out with, or the FDA has come out with initial guidance in October of this past year. What people really want to know, this has created a lot of interest, but also a lot of anxiety, as you might imagine. And I imagine that this is the area in which you get most of your questions. I don't think anybody questions the importance or the ability and the rationale for the FDA to oversee this area. But I wonder if you could say anything about the specificity of the timelines in which the clarity of the guidance will unfold, because I think the anxiety that I'm hearing is just the unknown of this, and that the initial guidance is not sufficiently clear for those in the business of developing these tests, whether they will be regulated, not regulated, what do they need to do, et cetera, et cetera. So I just love for you to give as much specific clarity on what's next with laboratory-developed tests.
Well, I gather that you think most people understand what is the issue here, but I think it might be useful to sort of go back,
please,
to the fact that over a period of many years, going back to, I think, 1976, when FDA was first, formally given by law the responsibility for the oversight of medical devices that include diagnostics. Laboratory-developed tests at that time were viewed as a category of tests that were developed within a given institution or facility. They were generally fairly simple tests used either in research or for patient care, but developed and interpreted by laboratorians within that institution, and for the management and care of patients within that institution. But over time, many of these tests have evolved such that they are actually used much more broadly and marketed widely, and are not quite such simple, straightforward tests as well, and certainly are some of them used in very important medical decision making and relatively high risk medical decision making in terms of whether they're accurate and reliable. Early on, FDA decided to exercise what we call enforcement discretion because of the nature of these tests. But as the tests have evolved, as the marketplace has evolved, we have been talking about the need for a more uniform approach to diagnostics, whatever the context of their development. And so we put forward a proposed guidance that laid out a risk-based framework for the oversight of laboratory-developed tests, which would sort of align them with how we do regulatory oversight of other similar diagnostic tests that are developed by industry. And it would be a phased-in approach, and as I said, really focusing on the high-risk LDTs. And we're in the process of really getting feedback on our proposed guidance, which was an effort to provide a framework for discussion. And some of you may know that since we put that guidance out, we've had a series of opportunities for discussion and engagement with stakeholders, including a public meeting. And I think that the comment period on that proposed guidance ends on February 2nd, so it's not too late to get your comments into us. And then we will take very seriously all the different feedback that we've gotten and the various concerns, which have ranged from very specific issues of science and indications for use of these LDTs, to administrative questions about the FDA process and whether it should be guidance or regulation, et cetera. But we're going to look at all of those comments and then we will move forward. So in terms of timeline, I can't give you a specific when we'll come out with the final guidance. But the idea here is really going back to what we were talking about before, which is that we want to be able to ensure that important diagnostics are in fact safe and effective, that they are reliable and accurate, and that patients and consumers and healthcare providers can really rely on them. And of course that matters because we want patients to be able to get an accurate diagnosis and get the treatment that they need. We certainly don't want an inaccurate diagnostic that might result in inappropriate treatment or lack of treatment when in fact treatment might be indicated. And as we think about how we will really be able to leverage all the opportunities in personalized medicine today, I think it's also critical for the research that the diagnostics that are used as we explore the opportunities for more targeted therapies and personalized approaches. The hub of personalized medicine is getting the target right and the diagnosis right.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the issue of clarity and standards and what will be evidence, sufficient evidence, is very important. I've had a lot of people, come to me saying, given this opportunity to speak to you this way, and you are gathering information, I don't expect you to respond to this, but the concerns that I've been hearing are, number one, I have not been hearing concern of regulatory oversight. What I've been hearing concern is the medical device framework appropriate for this area, or are we kind of pigeonholed into a set of criteria that was designed for something other than this? The second is the specificity of the guidance, and I know it's too early right now, but uncertainty is devastating, particularly to the small innovator rather than to the big company that could withstand time. The small innovator, time is money and you're always running out. The concern about whether the FDA will have enough resources, because this will potentially be a lot more areas to regulate. And then finally, as you already mentioned, should this be guidance or regulation? So those are, at least hearing from this group through me to you, that's what I've been hearing. We're almost out of time. I can't believe it. I'm sorry about that. But you have an audience here that goes from scientists and physicians and early startups that are, as I said, running out of money as we speak, to bigger companies, and they all really would like to know what is the best way they can engage with you? Or let me finish by saying, what advice do you give to this kind of complex audience as to what they ought to know so that dealing with the FDA is more of an enabler than a blockade?
Well, I think, number one, to underscore a point you made early on, that this is a very dynamic time for the FDA and for all of the science that you're working on in terms of, we are seeing a new reality and we have to all respond to it, and we have to make sure that we, in fact, are seizing the opportunities that advances in science and technology are presenting us to really deliver on that science for patients and consumers. And I think that's probably all of our shared goal. And from the FDA perspective, I think our sense is that we cannot do our job well if we try to do it in isolation. And we certainly can't do our job well if we sort of stick to old ways of doing things when the world around us is changing dramatically. Obviously, we are mandated by Congress to follow certain laws, and we have a legal regulatory framework in which we have to operate, but we have quite a bit of flexibility within that legal regulatory framework, and I think you're seeing that in terms of how we're approaching a lot of our product reviews right now, in terms of all of the different strategies that we've implemented to streamline and accelerate product reviews, and I think that's being reflected in the numbers in terms of review times, and also the way that we're engaging with product developers. I think on the diagnostic side, we're entering a period of intense collaboration and really a new appreciation of the fact that we have to change our approaches and our paradigms, and that the only way we're going to be able to do it, as I said earlier, is by being part and parcel of the advances in science and technology and not put ourselves apart. We need increasingly to rely on the expertise of the scientific and research community to help us both develop our regulatory frameworks in the way that really optimizes the opportunities in science, and we need your help in developing the databases and helping to curate those databases in a dynamic way that will continually update the information about what is known when we're thinking about how do we relate all of the information that's now available through genome sequencing and its appropriate relationship to clinical disease, targeted therapies, and the ability to provide the most personalized and appropriate treatments for patients.